Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss the major advances that have been made by the Ukrainians in their fight to reclaim their country from Russia. At the start of the week, there was already a real buzz amongst keen observers that something was going down. At the point at which I record this, it's sort of gone down. The map of held territories looks very different. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So although real news of the fight in Ukraine is largely absent from the mainstream media in this country these days, the benefit of being able to do this full time is I've got the time to find people who will give you good, accurate information, first or second hand. And the analysis is much more direct and much more useful. You can avoid the mainstream media filters altogether if you need to. Because although you'll see articles on the conflict in the news reasonably regularly, it often seems to have a particular focus that's like from our angle or some political angle, rather than the undiluted facts about what's going on the ground. What is going on with the war? And what's going on the ground right now is quite remarkable. You know, this photograph, for example, shows Ukrainian forces at Kupiansk. I checked it out on Google Maps. Obviously, I don't really know Ukraine. I check it out on Google Maps. You go, that's quite a long way to the east. That's a very long way to the east. Right in the middle of what was until recently comfortably held Russian control. And even without paying attention to commentators who will give you detailed information like this, should have been obvious to everyone things were not going at all well for Putin's regime. You remember how he was going to stage a mock referendum in Kherson, for formally joining the Russian Federation. Absolutely crucial to Putin's plans. The problem is he took a couple of territories in 2014. They're not linked up. They're not joined up. He needs them joined up. You know, what he calls the special operation. It has to purport to his own people that it's a war of liberation rather than a war of conquest, where supposedly Ukrainians want to join Russia. Well, that sham of a referendum, which a few weeks ago was being discussed as, it's going to take place quite soon. That's been postponed. You can't do that, because he hasn't got it anymore. Russia, they're shutting down the main gas pipeline to Europe recently. That's seen as pretty much the last roll of the die. What Putin's trying to do is starve the West of its living standards. He knows he cannot win while they supply Ukrainians with weapons. It's a right old mess. And in truth, Russia can never occupy Ukraine. It knows that now. That part of the plan must surely have been dropped. I don't know what he will now work towards as victory conditions, but it can't be that. Putin, I imagine, must just want a face-saving way out of this, which will have to include tearing off a big chunk of Ukraine. He has to sell it as a victory, not a no-score draw. It has to be big enough that it can be sold as a victory, but small enough that he can hold it. But right now, it's not clear he can hold anything. So he needs the West to stop supplying weapons to Ukraine. He needs the West to care more about their energy and food supplies than the fight for European freedom. Russia is utterly reliant on the old Soviet dogma that the West is so decadent that we can't tough it out for a bit longer. We're so weak and vain. That's Russia's plan, to string this out so long that the West, weak from the privations, urges Ukraine to strike a deal with the Kremlin. Ukraine's plan is to show that they can win this as long as the West keeps them well resourced. And more than that they can win it quickly. Before the summer, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss were describing the conflict as being something that would last for years. Okay, now it's still a long way off, but the longer it lasts, the riskier it gets for Ukraine. Less so Russia. Russia can afford a protracted battle. So Ukraine needs to speed this conflict along, but they can't afford to take ill-advised risks. They can't afford to take large losses. Russia can. That's the one thing they've got in their favours. They're sending in a new wave of conscripts. It's what Russia's done for centuries, really. That's been their tactics. Send wave after wave of serfs onto the battlefield and wear the enemy down. Only this time it's not working. Russia does have a lot of troops and it can keep throwing more at it, but it doesn't have enough to take a fully resisting Ukraine. It's too big. Those troops are also poorly trained, poorly equipped, poorly led, and that's an understatement. Right from the start of Ukraine's fight back, they have targeted key supply line resources. Over summer, they were able to move quickly to defend against Russian points of attack. They also had weapons coming in with the range to attack targets that Russia felt were in safe territory near their own real border. Now, what that meant was Russia didn't know where it needed to strengthen its defences, because all of a sudden nowhere was safe. And it lacked the speed and agility to react. So this is what has led to Russia's current tactics. Batter the crap out of Ukrainian cities and arable fields, starve the West of food and fuel, at the same time as turning eastern Ukraine into a wasteland that wouldn't seem like it's worth the price being paid to prolong the conflict. Presumably, at some point, Russia will offer a ceasefire on the condition Ukrainian forces do not encroach on certain territories, which are basically just bombed out shells anyway, that he'll claim as his own for now. Of course, as Garry Kasparov frequently says, to Putin, a ceasefire is simply a period of time that the Kremlin will use to rearm and replan for the next offensive. It's actually really important for the West, not just Ukraine, that Putin is actually defeated. But that is tricky when you cannot allow a face-saving way out. Then obviously the stakes are raised higher. But defeat would be surely the end of Mad Vlad. You know, he can't countenance defeat. His people couldn't, surely. He might end up catching the Russian plague, whose symptoms seem to include falling out of windows. Quite why any wealthy, influential Russians planning on criticising the government don't first move to a bungalow is beyond me. But this plan to weaken the resolve of the West is also struggling. It hasn't failed. It hasn't categorically failed. I'm personally worried about that resolve as winter bites. But public support for Ukraine is strong, in Europe at least. As long as our governments take the edge off the privations, it'll hopefully remain so. But Ukraine must also be worried, which is why they're going all out to demonstrate that they can win this quickly. The long-range HIMARS that Ukraine started using this summer have been pulling their weight big time. I saw commentators note that the dynamic of the war was shifting. Up until recently, Russia was the one dictating where the fighting would be, and Ukraine was holding the line. This week, it's been Ukraine on the offensive. And it's been a massive offensive. A very rapid push indeed. Overnight, there's been news Ukraine have captured a senior Russian general somewhere around Kharkiv. Now, I don't want to say too much about it because I'm seeing conflicting reports of just what his command was at the time of capture. There are some suggesting that the command he had at the start of summer, he'd been replaced. But he's still a senior general. It would still be a huge boost to Ukrainian morale and an equally massive embarrassment to Putin. So let's speculate a little bit here. So right now, Russia still holds the gains it made in 2014, Donbass and Crimea, as well as a significant portion of other eastern Ukrainian areas. But it's much less than it was a week ago. Strategically, if Ukraine can take Crimea, symbolically huge. Because that would be a real sign that Ukraine can not only kick Russia out of its 2022 gains, but also the gains that Putin had held comfortably for 8 years without any real resistance. It would be a sign that Ukraine will be whole again, that there's no need to come to terms with Russia that means allowing any part of his invasion to be retained as a trophy. Ukraine still can't afford to take silly risks. They don't have the manpower, but they do have everything else. They've got the will to fight for their country. The Russian conscripts are not fighting for anything. They're forced to fight what they know is the wrong war, and they're badly demoralised. Ukraine have been getting their military strategy right. It's been impressive, in fact. Russia's military strategy it's not necessarily that it's been dire as such, it's just been unable to meet the political expectations. And Ukraine is well resourced with weaponry, which must continue. And if we can get through this winter with Ukraine continuing to have the momentum, then that should be that really. But to get through this winter, Ukraine will want to give the Western media big victories. Imagine what it would look like to see Ukraine taking Crimea. You know, and these gains in Kherson recently, that is what commentators have been saying is the route to Crimea. So it looks like this is what they're attempting to do. Imagine if they take it. Or even look like they have a serious chance to do so. Because maybe they look like they're planning for this. Russia rushes to bolster its defences because it's hugely symbolic. Maybe Putin thinks we lose Crimea and that's it, it's curtains. And Ukraine shifts and takes more of their territory back in the east. You know, what if they take territory back right up into the established Russian border, say? You know, because this is what they've been doing for the past few months anyway. According to observers I've been following, you know, Ukraine's been holding the line against Russian attacks, absorbing it, while they hit targets elsewhere with their new long-range weaponry. It prevents Russia committing enough forces to make its offensives push through. Because they're thinking, hang on a minute, we thought that was, hold on, they've just struck this area, we thought it was safe. We need to now defend this area. They don't know what's going on. They don't know where they're going to be attacked next. They don't like the fact that Russia so far in this conflict has been the one attacking. Very badly, they've been losing, they've been pushed back, but they have been the ones attacking. Now they're being attacked. But taking Crimea would be immense. And although I talked about how that would play in the West in terms of shoring up our resolve to stand by Ukraine, also imagine how devastating it would be for the Russian people. I can't imagine too many people retaining faith in Putin if he loses Crimea. That'd be the beginning of the end for the whole sorry mess, surely. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships, and until next time, I'll see you later.